Tonight, why did a man drive his car into a crowd in southeast China, killing 35 people? Authorities waited 24 hours to confirm the ramming attack. The Chinese president says the suspect should be severely punished.
Police have already locked down the area. They've pushed us back. But it is a shocking attack to have happened in a place like China, which is normally so stable and under control.
Also tonight, the shape-shifting foreign policy of Marco Rubio, the man tipped to be the next US Secretary of State. And charities say Israel has missed the deadline imposed by the US to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza. But 30 days since the ultimatum, find out why Washington has made a different assessment. Tonight, I'll hear from one aid chief demanding the US stop sending weapons to Israel. Plus, as the Archbishop of Canterbury, spiritual leader to 85 million Anglicans, steps down, we'll ask what next for the church. And why a decision to add this man to the starting 11 of a top Argentinian club has left footballers and fans furious. That's all coming up on The World with me, Gillian Joseph. Good evening. We begin the programme tonight in southeastern China after a mass hit-and-run attack left 35 people dead and 40 others injured. Chinese President Xi Jinping called for the perpetrator to be severely punished after what he described as an extremely malicious assault. Videos showing bodies in the streets were quickly removed from social media. Most of the elderly victims had been exercising in a sports complex in the city of Zhuhai. From there, here's our Asia correspondent, Nicole Johnston, and a warning: her report contains some distressing details.
It is a dreadful attack and rare for China. A car drives into the Zhuhai Sports Centre, running people down as they were out for an evening of exercise on the field. It is carnage, there is fear and panic, of course, bodies everywhere. Someone yells out, "Terrorist!" Emergency crews arrive quickly, but for many, too late. Dozens of people killed and injured. Posting on social media, one man wrote his parents had been hit, and many of the victims were senior citizens. It was another 24 hours until the death toll was announced. Police say a 62-year-old man upset about his divorce settlement was responsible, and that they later found him stabbing himself in the car with a knife. He was taken to hospital. Few people will talk about what happened. This is as close to the stadium as we've been able to get. Police have already locked down the area. They've pushed us back. But it is a shocking attack to have happened in a place like China, which is normally so stable and under control. This woman brought her daughters along to lay flowers. She says she trusts the government will investigate.
I am just an ordinary person. I am very sorry for every life that is lost.
How does it feel in your heart as a Chinese person to see this happen in your city?
Actually, our country is very safe. It was just an accident.
This construction worker was emotional, upset so many elderly were hit, adding, "It rarely happens here. There is no public outpouring of grief in China. It's not allowed." And the censors were swift. These graphic videos quickly disappeared off China's social media. Nicole Johnston, Sky News, Zhuhai.
Now, we've talked a lot since the US elections about how Trump 2.0 could reshape America's role in the world. But it turns out that the man in the frame for the top foreign policy job has repeatedly reshaped his own stance on several issues. I'm referring, of course, to Republican Senator for Florida, Marco Rubio. He's previously described his likely new boss as untrustworthy and was fervent in his support for Ukraine after Russia invaded. Now he thinks Kyiv should seek a negotiated settlement with Russia, and he voted against the latest military aid package. We'll discuss his shifting policies in detail in a moment. But first, our US correspondent, Mark Stone, has this report.
It is apt, maybe, that the original owner of Mar-a-Lago left the place to the nation. Marjorie Post wanted the resort to be a winter White House. Instead, a businessman called Trump bought it. Nearly 30 years later, it is his winter White House, from where his inner circle is being formed. And so the glimpse inside, through the lens of his vlogger granddaughter, is a glimpse into the gilded world of America's next president.
He's up right now, 20 electoral college votes, so
This was election night, the characters who will be his closest aides absorbing the unfolding landslide.
So we have to get Elon with this boy.
In the week that's passed, with apprentice-like precision, he's been hiring his cabinet.
They hate little Marco Rubio so much.
But he said I had small hands. They're not small, are they?
Marco Rubio, once the butt of Trump's jokes, now in a circle.
All right, well, I wasn't going to say anything, but I have breaking news for you.
Tapped for Secretary of State. Republican senator for many years. Cuban immigrant, one-time presidential hopeful. Conservative hawk, loathed by China, watched by Russia. USA! Now it seems to be America's top diplomat. And on Ukraine, maybe saying the things others won't say out loud.
I think the Ukrainians have been incredibly brave and strong in standing up to Russia. But at the end of the day, what we are funding here is a stalemate war, and it needs to be brought to a conclusion.
He's certainly tacked to Trump in recent years, perhaps dropping his America leading the world stance. But he's a man America's allies know well.
This is a guy that the UK can do business with and the rest of Europe can do business with. Will it be difficult? For sure. I think, as I said, on China, Israel and Ukraine, there's going to be all sorts of differences on defence spending as well. I think there's going to be a real conflict of interest. However, this is someone who's a serious professional guy who's been on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for many, many years.
What do you plan to talk about?
This is the man the president-elect wants to be his man in Israel, Mike Huckabee, who said that there is no such thing as the West Bank or occupation. And if Palestinians want a state, they should go elsewhere. Tricky times then ahead for the Middle East, maybe, and on trade too, with the Trump tariffs. His principal business voice in the last presidency spoke to Sky News.
He's always been very much in favor of tariffs, so that isn't new. What is new is that there is now more of a general consensus in the public and in the Congress that tariffs are a useful thing.
And if there is one man consistently in the closest orbit, it's Elon Musk, the wild card in all of this for America's allies and for its foes.
OK, so here's what we know so far about who Donald Trump has chosen for the top jobs in his administration. As you've been hearing, Florida Senator Marco Rubio is expected to be rewarded for his loyalty with Secretary of State. Elise Stefanik, a key ally of the president-elect, will take up the role of United Nations ambassador. Stephen Miller is expected to take up the position of Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. He was one of the architects of some of Donald Trump's most controversial immigration policies. Mike Waltz, a former member of the National Guard and a Trump loyalist, is in as National Security Advisor. Also picked, the White House Chief of Staff, Trump's campaign manager, Susie Wiles. Well, Mark Stone joins us now. And Mark, we heard a bit in your piece about Marco Rubio, described by some as a shapeshifter. What does that possible appointment mean?
A shapeshifter, certainly, a man who has tacked towards Trump over the years, but also a man who is seen as a sort of centre-lane Republican, a man who has Republican values at his heart, was certainly for a time, and may have shifted from this a little bit, but an Atlanticist, an internationalist, a man who likes to see America as the world's policeman, which certainly seems to be at odds with what Donald Trump has been saying over the last few years. He is someone who Britain, if you're a politician in London or Berlin or Paris, you know well, because every foreign minister who comes here to Washington on every visit, as well as going to the White House, they go to the Hill as well, to Capitol Hill, where they meet the key senators. And Marco Rubio certainly is one of them. So he's a familiar character. And I think in that sense, as the former special advisor to the British Foreign Secretary said in my report there, he's someone they feel they can do business with, a sort of ally within the Trumpian world, and not a real wild card. And there were quite a few wild cards who were in the running to be Secretary of State. What I think is a very interesting appointment, which you also saw in my report there, but only was announced a very short time ago, is Mike Huckabee to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel. Now, this has to be confirmed by the Senate, a Senate now controlled by Donald Trump, so almost certainly will be confirmed. He is a man who has very forthright views on Israel and the Palestinian issue. If you are an Israeli, you will be delighted by this appointment. If you're a Palestinian, well, good luck to you. Because he has said in the past that he does not believe there is such thing as the West Bank. There is no such thing as a settlement. Of course, those are illegal settlements in the West Bank. He says there's no such thing as them. They are communities, they are neighborhoods, they're cities, and there is no such thing as the occupation. He's gone on to say that if the Palestinians want a state of their own, maybe they should look elsewhere. Now, Donald Trump has said that Mike Huckabee, who is a US governor at the moment of Arkansas, or former governor of Arkansas, has said that Mike will work tirelessly to bring about peace in the Middle East. Of course, the question is, what does that peace look like? Does it look like a fair peace, or does it look like a peace weighted very heavily towards Israel? So an interesting appointment there that will delight and dread, depending on your stance. I think broadly, his foreign policy picks appear to be more in line with traditional American conservative values. His domestic policy picks appear to be much, much more outwardly Trumpian, people who will be dealing with the challenges he's got at home on things like immigration. So plenty of interesting decisions emerging from this new Trump White House. And of course, as I said, the wild card in all of it is Elon Musk, who, if Marco Rubio thinks he's Secretary of State, well, who was the first person who allegedly was on that call with Donald Trump to Vladimir Putin? It wasn't Marco Rubio, it was one Elon Musk.
And Elon Musk also appearing in the family photos that we've seen with the Trump family. They brought him into the picture, so that tells us a lot about what his future role might be. Donald Trump to visit the White House tomorrow, Mark.
Yeah, look, I think for the past few days, Donald Trump has been in Mar-a-Lago. We've been watching from the outside as the people have come and gone. In 2016, it was Trump Tower. You could really see who was coming and going in Manhattan as he picked his cabinet back then. Incidentally, a cabinet that changed quite significantly over the course of 4 years as he fired them with apprentice-like precision. This time around, it's been slightly more behind the scenes in Mar-a-Lago. That cabinet is now forming, and the focus tomorrow will be here at the White House. All eyes are on the body language as former President Donald Trump, next President Donald Trump, meets current President Joe Biden. Fascinating stuff indeed.
Yes, and Mark, Joe Biden affording him the courtesy that he didn't afford the incoming president when he left in 2016.
Yeah, the last time that Donald Trump went through this was in 2016, in fact, when he took over as president first time around, and then outgoing President Barack Obama. He welcomed him into the Oval Office. I think they had a 90-minute meeting. It was cordial, and I have to say, I was looking back at those images, and Donald Trump then, 2016, looked like a guy who didn't quite know what he was doing, who didn't quite know what politics was all about, didn't know what leading the country, leading the world was all about. He's a different man now. He understands how Washington works. He understands how to make Washington work his way. And so I think that the Trump we will see tomorrow will look very different to the Trump we saw back in 2016. But you're right, 2020, Trump didn't show up. for the inauguration because, of course, he claimed that the election had been stolen, that he'd won all along. He flew back into exile in Mar-a-Lago. But since then, what a lot has changed. Indeed. Mark, thank you very much. Let's take you to the Middle East now, where Israel has been accused of missing its aid deadline set by the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. He gave Benjamin Netanyahu an ultimatum of 30 days to ensure more supplies were entering Gaza. That deadline expires today. The UN is warning that there is an imminent likelihood of famine in the north of the Strip. Well, earlier today, the Jordanian Air Force carried out a large airdrop over the south of Gaza. Jordan's King Abdullah has called for countries to help the people of Gaza, who he's described as experiencing a humanitarian disaster. Well, NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel joins me now from Amman. And Richard, international journalists are not allowed inside Gaza, but you've been seeing it from above today.
So I went on this Jordanian military airdrop. It was a C-130 cargo plane. It left from a military base here in Jordan. It was carrying 8 tons of food and medicine, mostly dry goods, pasta, tomato sauce, and it flew over southern Gaza. And when we were in position, flying fairly low, the rear of the aircraft opened and the pallets were pushed off. And we also had a crew in Gaza filming the attempts to recover the aid. So when these aid pallets are dropped off the plane, they fall, they're lowered on parachutes. And what happened this time, I think, is revealing about the cultural situation, the political situation in Gaza, how desperate things have really become. In the past, there was always a struggle as people rushed to try and be the first ones on the scene so that they could get to the aid. Instead, what happened this time, according to witnesses who had been gathered there to hope to receive some of this food and medicine, is it was instead seized by an armed Palestinian family when other people tried to come and collect their share of the supplies. They were frightened away with gunshots in the air. They were forcibly sent back. And it shows the degree of lawlessness that has set in. After a year of war, after a year of siege, there is no government to speak of there, no police, even if they weren't associated with Hamas. There's total anarchy in Gaza right now, making even these aid deliveries well, today's likely was effectively impossible, but making aid delivery in general very, very difficult.
And Richard, meanwhile, international aid agencies are warning that Israel has missed the deadline issued by the United States for improving humanitarian conditions there and getting more aid in, although America is now saying that that is not the case, that there has been improvement.
So Israel was given a pass yet again by the Biden administration, a pass on a deadline that the Biden administration had itself set. So we saw today airdrops, which are very slow. They can be dangerous. Sometimes these pallets have fallen on top of people and killed the very recipients of aid that they're trying to help. They're enormously expensive, and 8 tons of aid were dropped today, but relatively speaking, that is a small amount compared to what can be brought in by truck. And the Biden administration sent a very sharp letter to the Israeli government saying that unless, and this was 30 days ago, that unless they did more to allow more trucks to go in to Gaza, to allow in more humanitarian aid, there were 3 specific requests: more trucks, more commercial trucks, and allowing more vehicles to access the north of the Gaza Strip, which is the most cut off, that there could be a reduction in U.S. military aid. The deadline passed today. The UN and humanitarian groups say that very little changed, that Israel did not meet the demands that were laid out in this letter. Yet, just a short while ago, the Biden administration said that there would be no change in policy with regards to U.S. aid, that it had seen some improvement in the amount of aid being allowed in, but still described the situation as dire.
OK, Richard, for the moment, thank you. And you can listen to the new episode of The World with Richard and Yalda from tomorrow morning. A week on from Trump's decisive victory, they discuss his emerging foreign policy. If you scan the QR code on your screen now, it will take you to wherever you get your podcast to find the show. Do stay with us on The World. Coming up, we'll continue with the Middle East. We'll hear from the State Department about why Washington isn't following through with its threat of action. Plus, I'll speak to the head of a leading charity about what the US should do next.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back. The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the nets?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing. A towering monument to the China dream and its demise. From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart. China is facing a tsunami of the elderly.
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world. Mass protests forced the president to flee. The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor. Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child. The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank. These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them. A referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide. Sydney's floodplains underwater again. This is the third or fourth time in the 18 months that their homes have gone under. Sky News, the full story first. It may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering designed to humour and to help us.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life?
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were discussing the need for more aid to reach people in Gaza. The amount of aid delivered to the Strip has fallen to its lowest level since December. Yet the State Department said today that Israel is not violating US law and would not be sanctioned.
We at this time have not made an assessment that that the Israelis are in violation of U.S. law. But most importantly, we are going to continue to watch how these steps that they've taken, how they are being implemented, how that they can be continued to be expanded on. And through that, we're going to continue to assess their compliance with U.S. law. We've seen some progress being made. We would like to see some more changes happen. We believe that had it not been for U.S. intervention, these changes may not have ever taken place. But most importantly, we want to see continued progress, and that's what we're looking for.
Well, I'm joined now by Jeremy Konyndyk, President of Refugees International, who signed an open letter to the US government. Thank you very much for speaking to us. What's your reaction to the news that the US now is finding that Israel hasn't violated any US laws and they're making progress in delivering humanitarian aid to the area?
Well, I think it defies belief and it contradicts the clear facts. We, Refugees International, along with 7 other humanitarian organizations, did a very detailed exercise looking at every single condition that the US government had demanded of the Israeli government. We assessed 19 different metrics. 15 of them we characterized as red, as totally inadequate progress. Only on 4 areas were we able to find any amount of progress and grade those as yellow. The sort of things that are red. There was a demand that the Israeli government rescind the evacuation orders that were no longer operationally necessary. They have, in fact, only rescinded 4 of the 65 evacuation orders that they have issued since the beginning of the war. 80% of Gaza remains under an evacuation order. There was a demand that the Israeli government begin allowing 350 trucks a day in. That's less than we think is necessary, but fewer than 100 a day have been getting in since the letter was issued. So, there really just is no way to look at the facts on the ground and claim that there is anything like adequate progress or even, frankly, a sincere attempt on the part of the Israeli government to meet with the demands that the US government had articulated.
So why do you think the US has decided that there is no case to answer and that significant progress is being made?
I think, frankly, the Biden administration has never had the political will to actually push the Israeli government to uphold its obligations under U.S. law or under international humanitarian law, and that has not changed. They issued this letter without apparently any intent to actually uphold the provisions and enforce the things that they're asking for. And frankly, I think the Israeli government basically knew that. Throughout the entire war, now for more than a year, we have seen demand after demand and plea after plea from the Biden administration for the Israeli government to protect civilians, to protect humanitarian workers, to uphold international humanitarian law, to allow aid access. Those have been ignored wholesale by the Israeli government in practice. And at the same time, the Biden administration has shown over and over that it will not actually use the leverage that it has to uphold the things that it's asking for. No surprise then that with this letter as well, the Israeli government basically assumed that would be the case and acted accordingly.
In your opinion, is there willful obstruction of aid getting through to those in need in Gaza by the Israeli government?
There's absolutely willful obstruction. I think what is useful about this letter, even though unfortunately it seems not to have been very sincere on the part of the Biden administration, is that it does articulate a very detailed set of steps that would constitute a good faith effort by the Israeli government to facilitate humanitarian access and relief of humanitarian needs. And so when you see that even that most generous of bars from their most steadfast of allies can't just not be met, but is basically roundly ignored, I think that speaks to the total lack of will on the part of the Israeli government to remove the obstructions that they have put in place.
What do you think needs to happen now? What do you need to see happen in order for aid to get through to the people who desperately need it?
So a lot of the elements in the letter are quite good. They need to allow people within Gaza to move out of some of these areas that have, or move back to some of the areas that had been under evacuation order. They need to allow the World Food Program winterization plan, which is desperately needed. They need to allow more food in, particularly into the north. They need to authorize more truck drivers so that the humanitarian agencies can actually move goods around within Gaza. The parameters are quite good in the letter. They just need to be upheld.
Jeremy Konyndyk, President of Refugees International, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you.
Well, do stay with us on The World. Coming up, the decision many say had to be made. Justin Welby resigns, but the Archbishop of Canterbury's influence spreads far beyond the UK's borders. So what happens to the global church now? We'll be discussing that next.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Welcome back. When you think of the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Church of England, well, you may just think of England. But Justin Welby's decision to resign over his handling of abuse allegations that were previously covered up by the Church has a far bigger impact than you might expect. He is, or was, the spiritual leader of more than 85 million Anglicans around the world, spanning more than 2,000 languages. Well, tonight we'll hear from one chaplain who thinks he made the right decision. But first, Lisa Holland has this report.
Having presided over the crowning of King Charles, in disgrace, Justin Welby sought the monarch's permission to resign. He was brought down by his own failings to respond adequately to the decades-long abuse of children and young men by this man, John Smythe, and deep-seated wider concerns within the Church of England over safeguarding. In a statement, Justin Welby said, "The Makin Review has exposed the long-maintained conspiracy of silence about the heinous abuses of John Smythe. When I was informed in 2013 and told that police had been notified, I believed wrongly that an appropriate resolution would follow. I must take personal and institutional responsibility. I hope this decision makes clear how seriously the Church of England understands the need for change." Now 64 and a retired teacher, Richard Gittins was one of John Smythe's dozens of victims. He says the resignation of Justin Welby should be just the start of the road to justice for him and many others.
I'm pleased he's resigned. It now shows that he's taken some action, and I think it also means that the focus can be turned on other people who knew and haven't done anything about it. Although he's the highest person in the church, he's not the most responsible for the cover-up. So I think it's time now to focus attention on other bishops who kept the stories to themselves.
For days there's been pressure from within the Church of England for Justin Welby to go. He refused. But criticism, when it came from leading bishops, could no longer be ignored.
Safeguarding is a barometer of the health of the culture of the church, and if we're getting that wrong, then we are failing in who we are, who we should be as a church. We are about the gospel of good news for the poor, the broken-hearted, those who are hurting, and it's really clear that we failed by allowing that abuse to happen and by allowing it to be covered up. And so, yeah, I feel deep shame.
The former Victims Commissioner Dame Vera Baird sees the resignation of Justin Welby as a watershed moment for the church.
I think he's done absolutely the right thing, but it is insufficient. Let's be real, he had a very short time left in office because he'd reached the retirement age, so it's insufficient for victims.
Do you think there needs to be a different way for child abuse to be investigated in the Church of England?
Oversight of the safeguarding and the investigations must be done totally outside of the hierarchy of the Anglican Church. It is very straightforward. They should engage with some of the well-known child abuse and adult abuse charities.
Change is coming at Lambeth Palace, the official residence of the Archbishop of Canterbury. But after a tumultuous week, the Church of England needs to show it can keep those in its communities safe. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
Well, Justin Welby was a controversial figure even before this scandal. He struggled to unite the global church, largely because of his progressive views on issues such as gay rights and the place of women. Our Home editor, Jason Farrell, looks back at his decades of service.
I here present unto you King Charles.
The man who crowned the king. He has been part of the fabric of British society.
God save the king!
Justin Welby led the Anglican Church for more than a decade, the upholder of Christian tradition, toppled by a scandal. His background was not traditional. The man who would meet the Pope and wed a prince only discovered the identity of his out-of-wedlock father in later life. He was not a lifer in the cloth. For 11 years, he worked in the oil industry before finding his calling.
Who are you, and why do you request entry?
I am Justin, a servant of Jesus Christ, and I come as one seeking the grace of God.
His rise within the church was rapid. 20 years after his first service as a cleric, he was enthroned Archbishop of Canterbury in March 2013. His first Christmas, he asked people to give 10% of what they spent on presents to food banks, setting the tone for a decade as a social campaigner. He criticised inequality, universal credit, energy companies for high fuel prices and the previous government's Rwanda policy.
We can, as a nation, do better than this bill. With this bill, the government is continuing to seek good objectives in the wrong way, leading the nation down a damaging path.
Those in favour, please show. Those against.
He led the Church of England's introduction of women bishops, but while he spoke out against homophobia, he struggled with the introduction of gay marriage.
The government wants it. We think there are issues around the way it's going forward. It's not a collision course. No, it's just part of the normal discussion that one has.
He has been principal of ceremony to some of the biggest moments in our nation's history.
Did you ever think that you would be the person who gave a sermon at the funeral of a queen and crowned a king?
Never. Not for one solitary second. I assumed that I would be a parish priest, and that's what I felt called to be.
His role as religious leader for 85 million Anglicans worldwide was under pressure after a review found the Church of England covered up for child abuser John Smythe, that Welby himself failed to ensure his former friend was investigated. But the woman who broke the story feels it's wrong to blame the Archbishop.
I'm personally very sad about this. I don't think it at all appropriate to blame him. He, as soon as he knew in 2013, he checked that it had been reported to police and social services, and he was told it had been.
Welby's departure leaves the church in turmoil. His replacement to be selected in a process involving a Church of England panel, the Prime Minister and the monarch, which typically takes 9 months. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, I'm joined now by Reverend Wilma Jakobsen, a retired Anglican priest and chaplain in Cape Town. Thank you very much for speaking to us. First of all, your thoughts on whether you believe it was right for the Archbishop to resign?
Yes, good evening. I do actually think it was right. I had read that he had talked about it and had thought about it, had decided not to resign. And when I read that, I said to myself, I gave him about a day. You know, I'm not sure he's going to be able to hold to this. I'm not going to resign. And so I was not surprised, maybe. It seemed so much to me the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do.
Was it inevitable, or do you think that perhaps he could have stayed and worked tirelessly to change the church from within?
I think that's what everyone says, and that's what many leaders would have said along the way. I think he has taken the harder step. I don't know of any other bishop who has actually resigned or retired because of this. All bishops would say, no, you want me to resign, but I'm going to stay and try hard to make a change from within. It's like he drew a line in the sand, which I think he needed to be done. It's the strongest statement to make. It's an agonizing decision to make. But for too long, and for so long, abuses like this have been covered up by people in churches in different places around the world, not just in the Church of England, in our own church of Southern Africa, in other places. There's always abuses in some way that have been swept under the carpet. And so, because it's complicated, or because we don't want this to damage the gospel and so on. But the victims and those who are the ones who were most destroyed by the abuses are the ones who are not then foregrounded. And so this, I think, was his way of saying, I take personal and institutional responsibility for not doing what should have been done at the time. As I understand, he said he could have done more at the time. And you could say maybe had he known more, but he acknowledged he took 4 years to meet with those who had asked to meet with him after 2013, if I read it correctly. So it took time for him to do that. So I think this, honestly, is all that is what needed to be done. It is exactly the right thing that needed to be done. And it possibly gives a sense of, I don't want to say hope, but a sense for the victims of saying someone is actually thinking now about us as part of this. It's huge. I mean, massive decision, right? I'm not saying it's not, obviously he didn't take this lightly, but it had to be done. Someone had to do it. He's the first person who actually had the guts to say, I'm going to stand up for what is right. I'm going to own up for what I could have and should have done more. And I didn't. That takes courage. That takes guts. That takes a real conviction. That takes character, all of which he has shown. And I'm sure he will continue to work for safeguarding and safe places in the church after he's ending his ministry as Archbishop.
And we know that the perpetrator in this case travelled to Zimbabwe and South Africa, where you are, and continued abuse. I'm wondering what damage you think it will do now that the Archbishop has resigned to the standing with the global church.
Well, I think in terms of Southern Africa and South Africa, there has been a call for an independent investigation, and I think that must take place. We have our own structures, we have our own processes, we have our own safeguarding processes, and I'm quite sure they will be taking it up. But I think that this idea of an independent investigation would be a good thing to do. I mean, I was ordained in 1988, and I don't remember this. I don't remember John Spine's name, but I have spoken to people today who didn't know him, so in and out of the church in various ways, and not just the Anglican Church, actually interdenominational spaces, which often happens. People like this move around in spaces where there are young people and where they can find people to abuse and so on. But they're always the nicest people, supposedly. So we have some work to do in Southern Africa, and there, as I understand, are many victims, and there may be more. There are usually more than one knows about. So the fact that there are victims who are still alive and will still need to be cared for in some way, and assured that the church desires to make the church a safe space.
Reverend Jakobsen, thank you so much for speaking to us. I'm sorry our time is short, but thank you very much for sharing your views with us. Do stay with us on The World after the break. Football mayhem, but not the usual drama. Find out why a decision to add an influencer to the starting 11 of a top Argentinian club has left players and fans furious.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Sower murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone, I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The judge made it very clear that she could see no justifiable reason why Sakulas wasn't here facing British justice.
I promised I would get him justice.
Sky News, get the full story first. It's legal to let go.
Set the speed and take the hands off.
I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back to Azerbaijan now, which is hosting this year's COP Climate Summit. In a surprisingly sharp-edged opening address, the country's president hit out at European leaders, accusing them of hypocrisy when it comes to oil and gas. We'll have more on whether Mr. Aliyev's comments cut through in a moment. But first, our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, reports from Baku on the mammoth task.
Sir Keir Starmer's arrival in Baku was more than welcome. He's one of the few G20 leaders to even attend a summit that's meant to accelerate action on global warming. And the climate-denying shadow of Donald Trump still hangs over the talks. His promise for a radical cut in UK emissions will go down well here, but what about back home?
I don't think that as we tackle this really important issue, the way to do it is to tell people how to run their lives and instruct them how to behave. And I'm not going to do that. I made a commitment before the election and shortly after the election that we'd be a government that trod lightly on people's lives.
But an 81% cut in emissions in just 10 years is anything but light. It'll take more than already ambitious plans for zero-carbon electricity, including things like heat pumps in tens of millions of homes and shifting millions more of us into electric vehicles. How are you going to get people to do that without making them do it?
It's not about telling people how to live their lives. It really isn't. Look, what we want to see, and I often say this, we're in the better lives business, and we think this is all achievable. But I'm absolutely about carrots, not sticks. And I think we can do this in a way that is in people's financial interests, based on the choices people make.
A political risk at home, perhaps, but at talks guided by the glaring reality of climate science, it's seen as the example of what every rich country must do. Keir Starmer's promise for such a radical cut in UK carbon emissions will bring some hope to these otherwise downcast corridors. But this round of talks is really about money, finance to help poorer countries adapt to the impacts of climate change. And on that front, Keir Starmer has come here with very little to offer at all.
The way to actually protect UK citizens is if the UK can actually help the whole world decarbonize. And for majority of the world, they require climate finance to be able to do that. We're in a climate finance COP. UK needs to step up and put climate finance on the table so that it can incentivize and inspire a global transition.
But there's no new money on offer from the UK and little from other rich nations here either. The rest of these talks will be taken up with how that fact tallies with the spiralling cost of climate impacts around the world.
Tom joins me now. And Tom, we heard the UK pledges there, but we also heard from the president of Azerbaijan, and he spoke to the challenges facing getting countries to agree on how to tackle climate change. And he also called the West hypocrites.
That's right. I mean, people often wonder why these talks move so glacially slowly, given the pace at which climate change is affecting us all. One of the reasons for that is just the enormity of the challenge. You know, we've got to cut emissions by 9% every year for the next 25 years if we're going to get to 1.5 degrees of warming or keep below it. We've also got to raise huge amounts of capital to finance that transition. But another thing that keeps snagging these talks up is the contradictions and the hypocrisy involved there. For example, China and many of the big oil-producing states like Saudi Arabia still argue they're developing countries, so shouldn't pay others to develop more cleanly. But there's also, yes, hypocrisy that President Aliyev of Azerbaijan spoke to today. Things like the European Union criticising Azerbaijan for not reducing its carbon emissions, but at the same time begging it for contracts for its gas to help it out in this situation resulting from the war in Ukraine. And today, in a real Trumpian move, he really struck out, slammed the West for that hypocrisy.
Fake news media of the country, which is #1 oil and gas producer in the world, and produces 30 times more oil than Azerbaijan, call us petrostate. They'd better look at themselves, or at least at their neighbor, which produces 10 times more oil than Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan's share in global gas emissions is only 0.1%.
Tom, what will success look like at the end of this summit? What tangible goals are they trying to achieve?
Well, this climate summit, this round of talks are focused primarily on finance, and that's the idea of getting money to flow from rich countries that grew rich on the back of burning fossil fuels to developing ones so that they can also grow their economies without contributing to climate change. Sounds fairly simple, but it is an ominous task, partly because it involves money. Wealthy countries don't really want to dig into their taxpayers' pockets to do it, and that presents an enormous challenge. But brace yourself for this, because the figures we're talking about are colossal. It took more than a decade to raise $100 billion a year to flow to poor countries. We're talking about a finance agreement here that is about $1 to $2 trillion a year flowing to developing countries, and they want that in place by next year.
Well, that brings us to the end of the programme tonight. Thank you for joining us. Tomorrow, Donald Trump heads to the White House for transition talks. We, of course, will bring you full coverage on all of that. Do be sure to tune in. Next up, news at 10.
Conflict. They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.